Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands regarding justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm rising to pursue a question, ironically, on a bill that has now passed the House, but it's still before the Senate, so I think it's relevant to take up the issues relating to Bill C-51. It's ironic to revisit this question because, well, let me share with you, Mr. Speaker, what transpired on February 6th in question period. I asked the Honourable Minister for Justice two aspects of Bill C-51, and one aspect related to the use of the word lawful to qualify protest in describing those exclusions from activities that might be seen to threaten the security of Canada. The second dealt with the new powers given to CSIS agents. I use the word ironic in referring to the first part, Mr. Speaker, and it will become evident when I repeat that my question on February 6th to the Minister of Justice relating to the use of the word lawful was this. I asked, will the Minister of Justice amend the Act to ensure that nonviolent civil disobedience is precluded from the ambit of the Act? And to that part of my question, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Justice responded by saying, protections against lawful protest are already covered by the Act. This will not pose a threat to individuals who engage in lawful assembly. Of course, Mr. Speaker, my question was very specifically to the question of nonviolent civil disobedience and to the question of protest that was by definition not lawful. Now, time has passed, and we are all aware that in clause by clause, it was the Conservative members of the committee themselves who, anticipating that this simply was an untenable piece of legislation and the language used in this section would not work, actually made the change I was requesting. So for a rare instance in this place, I can say that although the Minister for Justice on February 6th denied there was any problem with the word lawful, in the end that word was removed to ensure, or at least to increase the likelihood that people engaged in nonviolent civil disobedience would not be caught up in the ambit of the Act. The second point then, Mr. Speaker, remains quite relevant. The second question I asked the Minister of Justice, and I was cut off by the end of the question, was I was asking him to explain to the House the purpose of Part 4, Clause 42 of the measures that, quote, to reduce the threat to the security of Canada, CSIS shall not, quote, violate the sexual integrity of an individual, unquote. And I was trying to ask him why would such a section be included. His response was to say that the mandate of CSIS is not extending beyond its lawful authority and of course subject to judicial oversight. So let me pause for a moment on the Minister of Justice's claim that C-51 includes judicial oversight. It clearly does not. Many witnesses testified to this extent and to this point. Judges are involved in the section that I related to the Minister. Clearly a judge is involved. A judge is allowed to grant a warrant to a CSIS agent to break domestic law or to violate the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. But that is not judicial oversight. These would be secret hearings in which only government is represented. There will be no special advocates to ensure the public interest is protected. Moreover, there's no opportunity for the judge to ensure that the warrant that he or she has issued is executed properly or appropriately. And there's no ongoing oversight of any kind over CSIS activities now that they have been empowered by this House, but not yet by the Senate, to engage in disruption activities. Nor is there any oversight over security operations in particular between the RCMP and CSIS and CSEC and Canadian Border Services. This is where the risk lies, Mr. Speaker, that these different security agencies will operate without knowledge of what each other are doing, thereby making us less safe.
The Honourable Parliament Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to speak tonight and kind of address some of the misinformation that's still being spread about this bill. And there was a lot of unusual stuff in that question from the member from Saanich Gulf Islands. Mr. Speaker, it's the international jihadist movement which has declared war on Canada. Canadians are being targeted by jihadi terrorists simply because these terrorists hate our society and the values our society represents. Jihadi terrorism is not a human right, it's an act of war. And that's why our government has put forward measures that protect Canadians against jihadi terrorists who seek to destroy the very principles, Mr. Speaker, that make Canada the best country in the world to live. That is also why Canada is not sitting on the sidelines, as some would have us do, and is instead joining our allies in supporting the international coalition in the fight against ISIL. Le concept d'une menace.
The concept of a threat to Canada's security is clearly established in the CSIS Act. This definition exists since the passage of the original bill, the Anti-Terrorism Act, and in the Anti-Terrorism Act 2015 changes absolutely nothing in that definition.
Act, Mr. Speaker, threats to the security of Canada comprise terrorism, espionage, sabotage, and foreign influenced activities. They also include, Mr. Speaker, violent or unlawful covert acts to overthrow our constitutional system of government. And to further clarify misinformation being spread by the opposition continually, I want to remind members that CSIS is not permitted by law to investigate lawful advocacy, protest, and dissent. Under its new mandate, it would not be able to disrupt these activities either. Le fait
The fundamental fact is that it is our police forces that work to protect our rights and freedoms, and that it is jihadist terrorists who threaten our security and who wish to take away our rights.
Speaker, while I'm on my feet, I would take this opportunity to ask the member from Sanish Gulf Islands to do the right thing. Several days ago, that member made ridiculous comments about admitted terrorist Omar Ahmed Kader. He pleaded guilty to heinous crimes, including the murder of American Army medic Sergeant Christopher Spear. And our Conservative government has vigorously defended against any attempt to lessen his punishment for these admitted crimes. While the Liberal leader refused to rule out special consideration for this convicted terrorist and the NDP actively tries to force Canadian taxpayers to compensate him, we believe victims of crime, not the perpetrators, are the ones who deserve compensation. That's why the member opposite must apologize to Tabitha Spear, who was left without a husband, and Tanner and Taryn Spear, who were left without a father at the hands of this cold-blooded terrorist, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Sandwich Gulf Islands.
Well, the honourable member has created the impression that the issues I raised about C-51 are taken in ignorance or denial of the risk of jihadi terrorists. Quite the contrary. My point, had he been listening, was that by creating disruption activities by CSIS agents without proper oversight and with no requirement for pinnacle control between CSIS and the RCMP, we are, in fact, leaving ourselves more vulnerable to such terrorist attacks. The advice from John Major, former Supreme Court judge who oversaw the Air India inquiry, was very clear to the Public Safety Committee that without a very clear, he advocated a national security advisor to operate in pinnacle control. But witness after witness urged that we have some way to ensure that CSIS agents and RCMP officers connect with each other, know what each other is doing, and someone provides oversight. That's what's missing in this act. That's what makes it more dangerous.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to encourage the opposition member to read what is found in the Anti-Terrorist Act 2015. I find that reading the bill is the best way to find the answers to these questions.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, I will repeat. CSIS is forbidden from investigating or disrupting lawful advocacy, protest, and dissent. This bill also places firm limits on what CSIS can do to disrupt threats. The
Canadians expect that their security and intelligence agencies will have the tools that they need, not only to collect information, but also to prevent threats that could harm Canadians and Canadian interests. They also expect that their politicians do not glorify the terrorists. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.